Going live in three, two. Wait, we're already live. Okay, Moses, wash. What are they doing?
They're checking on the dogs.
Okay, you guys come on in, grab your seat. We're going to get going here in a second.
Sitting over there, so
What are you supposed to say?
yes, sir.
Great, do that. Okay. All right, so for anyone that got my email or saw my post on Facebook, it was wrong. We're not doing Genesis 26 and 27. We're doing Genesis 25 and 26. I don't know if anyone caught that. Okay, but we finished 24 the last time we met. So this week we're going to be going over Genesis chapter 25, and we are going to finish 26. And really the only other verse we're going to touch on is Romans chapter 2. So we're not going to be jumping around in the Bible a whole lot. So with that, it is 7 p.m. So if you would, bow your heads for a word of prayer with me, and we'll jump in and we'll get started. God, I want to just ask for your help tonight. Today was really busy for me and really rushed, and I want to ask that you please just help me to calm down and maybe take away any of the stress and anxiety of getting ready for tonight, and help tonight to be just a good, enjoyable, fun time where we learn about the Bible, we learn about you, and Lord, please speak to all of us in some way so that we can be more like you and less like us, and do more of your will and less of our will in this next week. And God, we certainly want to pray for Karen. Louis told me that Karen wasn't feeling good tonight, and they're going to be watching us at home, and we just want to ask that you would please have your hand of blessing upon her and make her feel better, and bring her and Louis some comfort. It's never any fun to be sick. And Lord, with that, we love you greatly, and we just want to invite you here, and we want to thank you that we can get together and study the Bible, and Lord, certainly please speak through me, and that's it, Lord. We love you. Amen. All right, so if you have your Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 25, and we're going to jump in. And I know I've said this in the past, but I'm overly concerned that these two chapters are not terribly exciting. I was telling my wife before, I don't have any information that I'm just dying to tell everyone. Whereas sometimes we go over a chapter and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to tell everyone this. This is so neat. So we'll see how this goes. Hopefully there's a lot of questions, because I think the lesson is going to be a little shorter tonight. We're just going to jump in, and we're going to learn a couple chapters of the Bible. So we're going to talk about Esau and Jacob. So in Genesis chapter 25, we're going to start out by reading verses 1 through 4. As you can see on the TV, we have a family tree of Abraham and his three different, we would call them his three different wives at different points. And we're going to go over kind of the family tree and their kids and how that ties together. And it's part of the lesson. So we're going to go over that here in a minute. So Genesis chapter 25, starting in verses 1 through 4, just follow along with me, and we'll go from there. Then again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him. Now, bear with me. Understand, there is a proper way to pronounce all of these names, but I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to fumble through them as quick as I can, and I'm going to do it again later in the chapter. But don't take my phonetic pronunciation as the proper one. So her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua, and Jokshan begot Sheba and Dedan. So Jokshan was one of the sons of Keturah, and now it's saying that he had two sons, Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim and Letushim and Lumin. And the sons of Midian, Ephah and Epher and Hanok and Abida and Elda. All these were the children of Keturah. All right, so here Abraham takes a wife, and they have a bunch of children, 6 that are listed. Did he have more? We don't know, but these 6 are listed. So remember that just in the previous chapter or two, we went over the death of Sarah. So now Abraham gets remarried. Now, one of Abraham's sons, Jokshan, has 2 sons, Sheba and Dedan. And I don't even think I put them on the board, but those are pertinent because those are both principal cities of Saudi Arabia. And we're going to see that that's where the nation comes from. From the tribe of Dedan and Sheba come what we believe is the nation of Arabia, and it's called that in the Bible, and then later becomes the nation of Saudi Arabia. Now, remember that in Genesis 17:4, God promised Abraham that he would be the father of what? Many nations. Very good. Here we are seeing additional nations. God didn't say that you will be the father of one great big nation called the Israelites. He said you'll be the father of many nations. And we're going to see how that works in 1 second here. So moving along, verses 5 through 10. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. Mom, can you just threaten their lives and tell them their father's going to murder them if they don't shut their mouth?
I'll threaten them
Okay,
with father.
great. So we have 3 children upstairs that are supposed to be quietly watching cartoons, and instead of quietly watching cartoons, they're screaming at the top of their lungs. Okay, so verses 5 through 10. Here we go. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. But unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived, eastward unto the east country. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 160 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. Okay, so Isaac inherited all that Abraham had, and this is important, and it shows us something here. Gifts were given to the other children of Abraham's concubine, which was Keturah, and also to Ishmael, but they weren't significant in comparison to what Isaac received. So Isaac, being considered the firstborn by both Abraham and God, even though Ishmael from Hagar was born earlier, Isaac gets the entire inheritance. So then in verse 7, Abraham died at the age of 175, and he was buried in the cave with Sarah. And that was the cave that Abraham purchased for the burial place of his wife. And we read that, I believe it was 2 chapters ago. All right, verses 11 through 18. And it came to pass, after the death of Abraham, that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahairoi. Now these are the generations: Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, and Hadar, and Tema, Jator, Naphish, and Kedma. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We're just going to go one forward here, and there we go. So as we can see, Abraham, we have the 3 wives. Keep in mind, Keturah was a concubine. Hagar would have been considered a concubine as well. And Ishmael has 12 princes. These princes have castles and cities. So they go on to become nations as well. And we're going to see how this works here in a little bit. let's see, let me get back to my notes and see what I'm supposed to be telling you. All right, 11 through 18, I think that's what we read. So here, actually, no, let me read two more verses. So let's see, these are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations, and these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he gave up the ghost and died and was gathered unto his people. So he was not buried with Sarah and Abraham, and keep in mind, every time it seems like we talk about Ishmael, a division is made. And when you read this last one, it said, Ishmael, the son of Hagar, the handmaid, the Egyptian. God uses a half a dozen titles to explain this is not Abraham's wife who is receiving the promise of me. This is a different woman. And he uses several words to explain that. And then here again, when Ishmael dies, where was Ishmael gathered onto? Unto his people. Separate from Abraham and Sarah. And God is again making a dividing line. These are two different groups of people. These are not Abraham and Sarah's family. This is not part of the promise. This is not part of the covenant. This is separate. Okay, so here God goes out of his way to describe this family tree as illegitimate. Ishmael is called the son of Hagar, who's described as the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, both terms reiterating that they are not part of the inheritance. Ishmael has 12 sons. They are princes who preside over towns. And again, God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, plural, not just the nation of Israel. And he talks about that in Genesis chapter 17, verse 4. Okay, and there are the names of the children of Ishmael. They're not important as far as I'm concerned. I don't think they show up later in the Bible. If they do, I'll bring us back and show you this. But something you notice is that one way that the Bible does it one way that the Bible does it a lot of times is it goes over the least important first and kind of tells you about them and gets them out of the way, and then it focuses on what's important. And that's what God's doing here. He says, this is Keturah, and these are her children. This is Ishmael, these are his children. And now we're going to focus on what's important, which is Sarah and Isaac and the promise of God. So we're going to read verses 19 through 23. All right. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac. And when Isaac was 40 years old, when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian, of Padanaram, the sister of Laban, the Syrian, and Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, children plural. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And I think that's where I wanted to stop here. All right, so let's see. All right, we're going to jump right in. This is the spicy part. So there are 2 things that I noticed here. The first thing, nobody likes to hear, and I get into trouble every time I bring it up, so I'm going to start with this one. God should be in charge of our family. And specifically here in the Bible, it says our children. So for some reason, people always get all hot and bothered whenever I bring up this idea that God is in charge of our family, both the children we have and the children that we have not had yet. Now, most Christians I meet do not want God's opinion when it comes to the number of children they should have, if they should have any, how to raise them, how to discipline them, how to instruct them, and on and on and on. For some reason, if you want to preach a message and get the most hate mail from people in the form of emails and notes in the following week, just preach a lesson talking about the family and children and how God's supposed to be in charge of it all. The 2 most important things in the lives of just about every American Christian seem to be children and money. And nobody seems to care what the Bible says about children and money. Most Christians I meet won't even ask God's opinion, let alone tell God that he is in control of both and can do whatever he wants. If someone ever said to me, and keep in mind, people don't ask me my opinion very often, Patrick, I just don't feel like God is blessing my life. What do you think's going on? I would ask them about two areas of their life, family and money, and find out, are we doing God's will in these areas? Now, understand, people often say, but I don't want to have any kids, or I only want to have one kid, or I don't think I can afford to tithe. Okay, that's fine. But did we ever think to ask God what he wants in those matters? That's all I'm saying. For some reason, you bring up these ideas and it's not popular because these are the ones that we want to have control over. Okay, so back to the Bible study. Rebekah was barren and Isaac went to God to fix the problem. So the second thing that we notice in these couple verses here that I think is important, not only that God is in charge and should be in charge of our family, but number two, Isaac goes to God when he has a problem. This obviously speaks volumes because so many people do not do this. The struggle for every Christian comes down to the will. My will versus God's will. And the best and most healthy position we can be in is we can be repulsed by our own will and attracted to God's will. And we want to constantly seek God's will, and we want to constantly avoid doing our own will. Because God knows best. In whatever circumstance we're in, whatever situation we're up against, whatever great ideas we have, I'll ask Christians this all the time, like, well, did God ever ask your opinion on the matter? What'd you tell God that you think you should do? And everyone looks at you like you're crazy. It's because God never asked your opinion. God never one time has asked my opinion. God is waiting for me to ask his opinion on every matter. I'm supposed to run after and seek after and look for his will. And that's where the blessings reside, under the tent of God's will. Off in the distance is Patrick's will, and it's always raining over there. Okay, that's not, the blessings are not under the tent labeled Patrick's will. That's where chaos is. So Isaac, when he's faced with a problem, the first one that we see since he got married, which is Rebekah is barren. They want to have kids, obviously. That's how they found out that she's barren. Isaac goes to God in search of an answer. So we learn that God was in charge of Isaac's life, his marriage, and his children. So when Isaac has a problem, he goes to God to get it fixed. Another thing you'll notice, in verse 22, Rebekah goes to God for her problems as well. She brings up the idea that there's something wrong. The children struggled together within her. Now, I don't know what specifically that meant or how that felt, but she seemed to realize that something was strange or different or off, even though she's a first-time mother. That makes complete sense. I read this book called The Emergency Childbirth Manual. Okay, I think it's about 25 pages. It's a small little spiral-bound book, and you'll find it in a lot of trunks of police cars, and a lot of firemen and first responders have read this because it was a doctor who's delivered tens of thousands of children, and he wrote a book which was basically, if you're ever caught in a situation where you all of a sudden have to deliver a baby, you can go to this book and in 5 minutes gloss over it, go to the reference, and you can deliver a baby successfully. And do you want to know what that book says? Whenever you don't know what to do you know what you're supposed to do?
Ask the woman.
Ask the woman. That is what a medical doctor said, who's delivered tens of thousands of children. He says, ask the woman what she thinks she should do next. And he said, when in doubt, do that. That's the way God designed it. So anyway, Rebekah has this feeling. She knows something is strange or off. Like I said, she has no other pregnancy to compare this to. Okay, but she knows something's off, and she goes to God. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb. Okay, so Rebecca goes to her problems as well, and this is really a picture of a model marriage, which is problems come up, and the husband and the wife bring them to God. And we find out that the problems are solved. Also, something to notice is that what is the title or the name given to what's going on? What's inside of her? In verse 22, it says, and the children struggled together within her. Once again, we're just going to, hit this one out of the park real quick and keep going. If you, for any reason, want to find support for an abortion in the Bible, it is not there. Every single time a woman is pregnant, they are children. 100% of the time. Old Testament, New Testament, Mary, Elizabeth, Hagar, Rebecca, every time it's mentioned, the woman is with a child. Okay, don't try to find evidence for it. God is not for the murder of babies. As a matter of fact, that was something that pagan nations did, and God usually destroyed those nations for it. You don't have to like it, but we do have to recognize that is what God says. So now in verse 23, God gives Rebecca not only an answer, but a very specific answer. God tells Rebecca something very strange. God says that the elder shall serve the younger. Now, this is an exception to the rule. What you have to understand in this culture, all the way up through the time of Christ and the first century church, it is the firstborn that would be the priest of the family. The firstborn would get a double portion of the inheritance of the mom and dad. The firstborn was considered special. The firstborn was actually a title as if they are the leader. Jesus is called the firstborn of creation in the book of Colossians. It's a title of eminence. So the idea that the firstborn would serve the younger one made no sense whatsoever for God to explain that. But you find that God does that a lot. In a lot of stories, you find out that God uses a Gentile to be the hero and save the nation of Israel. And that is abhorrent to the Jews. All of these ideas are directly opposed to the way they would expect God to work. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving here. Verses 24 and through 26. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and the name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. So Isaac was 60 years old. Okay, so the name Esau and the word red in the Hebrew language sound similar. That's where we believe the name came from. If you accent the syllables slightly differently between the word red and Esau, you can change the words. He also came out red, which is where the name came from. You're going to see the same thing happen with Jacob. So Jacob was the second, and his name in Hebrew is Jacob. And actually, I'm going to write this out. So, I think it would be like that. Okay. So Yitzhak is Isaac, Jacob is Jacob, Abram is Abram. So then Jacob means, and I should have wrote this somewhere else. Missing a word here. Means may he protect. He being capitalized, meaning God. May God protect. Now, Akab, means heel. And Akab means, let's say, sly, devious, insidious. So notice Jacob's name, okay, Jacob, may he protect. If you change the pronunciation just slightly, it means heel, which is where he grabbed of Esau when he was born. And then Akab, again, change the name just slightly, the pronunciation, and it means sly and devious, which we're going to see in the next chapter is what Jacob is. So, something to remember when we are talking about names, the King James Bible uses transliteration instead of translation. So, transliteration is to write words using a different alphabet. In this case, Hebrew words into English. So we take Jacob and we spell it Jacob, so you would pronounce it the same, Jacob, Jacob. But that is not a translation. The translation means may he protect. So a translation is to change the words into a different language. Now understand, if the King James Bible used the translation, then every time the name Jacob came up, it would say, may he protect. And every time the name Abraham came up, it would say father of nations. So neither of those makes sense, which is why names are transliterated. We get the phonetic pronunciation of the name. It does not give us the meaning of the name, and without the meaning, sometimes we can miss out on something we want to understand, which is why we can look up the meaning of the name. It's not difficult to do. So either way it is done, you're missing something. Transliteration gives us a name we can easily read that makes sense without the meaning. Translation gives us the meaning, but you have a ridiculous phrase in place of a name, making the Bible unreadable. You just need to understand that anytime you read the name in the Bible, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Methuselah, they are all a transliteration. They're taking the Hebrew spelling and pronunciation and making it an English pronunciation, which is the only way it would make sense to do. But there is also a meaning behind it. So you have to understand that anytime you come across a name in the Bible, the meaning is significant and it'll teach us something. So that's why we look up the names and look up the meanings. Does that make sense? Okay, so just so we're all on the same page, we understand how this works. Okay, so if we go to the next slide here, this is a real short one. Here we see Isaac has two sons with Rebekah, Esau the oldest, and Jacob the youngest. Now we're going to see what happens here in a minute, and how this works, and how all the names and the whole family tree tie together. Okay, so let's read just verses 27 and 28, and we're getting close to the end of this first chapter. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter and a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Okay, so here we see that Esau and Jacob are clearly very different people. Esau is the type of man who is what we would probably call outdoorsy, and his father likes that. Jacob is the opposite. He's what we would call indoorsy, and his mother likes that. Now, this is described in verse 28, where we see Isaac enjoying the venison of Esau. So Esau was a talented or skilled hunter, and Isaac enjoyed that part of his son. Now, I don't want to assume too much, but it seems like Esau wears cowboy boots and enjoys hunting, whereas Jacob enjoys scrapbooking. Okay? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with scrapbooking. I am saying that no father dreams of scrapbooking with his son. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's not a good or a bad thing. Isaac had an affinity for Esau. Rebekah enjoyed spending time with her son, Jacob. That's what we get from it. The Bible doesn't give us any more, details beyond that. All right, so Genesis 25, we'll read verses 29 through the end of the chapter. And Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die. And what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, Swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Okay, so Jacob was boiling pottage. Esau came back from hunting, and apparently he had a bad day. He didn't get any animals. He didn't seem to have any success, which is why we believe he was so hungry. Esau, which means or sounds like the word red, who was hairy and red-skinned, his descendants are called Edomites, and the land is called Edom. It dates back to this transaction with his younger brother. And, oh boy, I'm missing a point. I think that the word red and the name Esau sounds like Edom, which is why the land that he dwells in and the descendants of Esau end up being the Edomites. I don't remember that, so I'd have to look it up. So don't take that, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it worked. In verse 31, it was prophesied that Jacob would end up with the birthright, right? Remember, Rebekah prayed and God answered very specifically, said that the younger was going to serve the older, and now we see that it happened. So Esau demonstrates how much he values his birthright. Esau apparently doesn't regard the birthright as important, which is why he's willing to trade it for what seems to be some bread and a bowl of soup. You could make the argument that he was going to starve to death. I don't see that, that's the case. Later on in the Bible, in Romans, I think it's chapter 9, verses 14, 15, and 16, it talks about how God loved Isaac and hated Esau. And I believe that it's talking about this in particular, where Esau didn't even regard the birthright as important or that beneficial, which is why he said, fine, what do I care? What's a birthright going to do to me? Give me the soup. Jacob clearly recognized that the value of the birthright he recognized that there was value to the birthright. We don't know if Jacob was told the prophecy by his mother. Because remember, God told Rebekah the prophecy that Jacob was going to rule over Esau, and we don't know if Rebekah told Jacob that and he was just waiting for the opportunity. Either way, he did wait for the opportunity, whether he knew it or not. And when the opportunity presented itself, he seized it and he got the birthright. So now this is going to be important in the next 2 chapters. Okay. Yeah, please, questions?
I'm just curious why he didn't regard the birthright as something important. I mean, in that day and time, and not everybody else was living in that area, that was the birthright was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it just seems strange that
he would give that away for anything.
Yeah.
I agree. And that's why I think the argument is made that he must have been starving to death. And without this bowl of soup, he was going to die. I don't know if that's the case.
And I don't think we necessarily have all the details. I mean, maybe he had an extremely terrible day out, and maybe he was even injured or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem, is we don't have any more of a picture than, the couple verses that the Bible tells us. It seems that he was willing to give it away pretty cheap, that's why it's surprising. But yeah, again, the rest is conjecture. Okay, now we're going to see what the birthright is going to be worth pretty soon, and you're going to see why Esau is upset in the near future. So now we're going to change gears a little, and we're going to not focus on Jacob anymore. We're going to go back to Isaac. So in chapter 26, we read, And there was a famine in the land, beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell of thee. Sojourn in the land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries. And I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. All right, so here, this is the second famine, and the Bible says that specifically. We're not talking about the one that happened during the time of Abraham, even though you'll notice a lot of the details are very similar. So there was a famine in the land for both Abraham and Isaac. Both of them were thinking about going where?
Egypt.
Thinking about going to Egypt. Both times God says, don't go to Egypt. They end up in Gerar. And Gerar is the place that is about halfway between Canaan and Egypt. Now, another thing you got to remember, and this is off on a little bit of a rabbit trail, Isaac never leaves Canaan. He doesn't go anywhere. And that is pertinent because we find out that later on, thousands of years later, Christ had the same experience, which is Christ didn't travel all over the world and go to lots of countries. He remained in present-day Israel. So God tells Isaac not to leave Canaan, and he settles in Gerar, and Isaac is there, and he speaks to Abimelech. Abraham does the same thing, speaks to another man named Abimelech. Now, many of us believe that Abimelech is a title and not a proper name, because you find out that Abraham did that, and then many decades later, Isaac does that. We read about Abimelech during the time of Abraham as well, during Genesis chapter 20. So we believe it's probably a title as far as he's the king. It says outright that he's the king, but we believe Abimelech is a title and not his proper name. I could be wrong about that, but we'll see that it says things like that later on again. Okay, in verse 2, God says to remain in the land he gave to Abraham. So who is God talking to? Isaac. That's right. Remember, he shifted away. We're not talking about Jacob right now. We're talking about Jacob's father, Isaac. And God repeats the promise he made to Abraham. He tells him about the land he's going to get, the number of kids he's going to have, that they're going to bless every nation on the earth. He goes over everything, and he reconfirms the covenant with Isaac. And God uses a word, and he says sojourn. What does the word sojourn mean? Or what is a sojourner?
Traveler?
Okay, that's part of it. Traveler is part of it. But there's another part of that word that is important for us. Any other guesses? Okay, a sojourner is a temporary resident. It's someone that travels through a part of the world, city, country, whatever, and they're a sojourner, and they're going to spend some time there, but that is not their home. God tells us that we are supposed to look at the world that way. We are not supposed to consider the world the place that we live, the place that we are going to live. This is just a place that we're just visiting for a little while. And when you think about the time we're going to spend here on earth, and then the amount of time we're going to spend in heaven with the Lord, I mean, this is just, not even a drop in the bucket. This is a blink. We are only here for a short time. We're traveling, we're passing through, we're supposed to accomplish our mission here, and then this is not our final destination. That's my point. Okay, in verses 3 through 5, God tells Isaac of all the ways he will be blessed. God confirms the covenant with Isaac, and then in verse 5, God tells us why. So now, if we had to sum up why God blessed Abraham in one word, what do you think that word would be? In verse 5, it says it.
Obey.
Obey. Obedient. Okay, so the word, the answer is obedience. That's the reason that God reaffirms the covenant with Isaac. And remember, God doesn't say, I'm going to bless you, Isaac, because of what you did or who you are or what. God said, I'm going to bless you because of what Abraham did and who Abraham was. And Abraham obeyed. Now, don't ever believe the lie that has permeated American Christianity and many churches today, and that is the idea that you are just fine the way you are and don't worry about what God says. It is quite the opposite. Like a loving parent and their child, God wants obedience because God knows what is best for us, and he wants us to obey him so that we will have the best that he has to offer. The idea that you're fine and everything's fine and don't worry about it, that is nonsense. That's not anywhere in the Bible.
Do your own thing.
Yeah, have it your way. Okay, Burger King Christianity is hogwash. Have it your way. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that. God says, obey me and you will be blessed, and my blessings will far exceed your wildest dreams. Whatever you think will make you happy, obey me and be blessed, and you will be happier than that. Your life will be infinitely better beyond words. Okay, I just want to throw that in there because it drives me nuts whenever I hear those ideas that everything's fine, you're fine, don't worry about anything, do whatever you want. Can I say that's why we come to God? Because we did whatever we wanted and it didn't work? If we could just do whatever we wanted, why did Jesus die on the cross? Why did thousands of people die in martyrdom to try to get this book around the world? If you can just do whatever you want. It's just such a stupid idea. And it's pushed so often today. It really is disappointing. Okay, starting in verse 6. And Isaac dwelt in Gerar, and the men of the place asked him of his wife. And he said, she is my sister. For he feared to say, she is my wife, lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah, his wife. And Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, of a surety, this is thy wife. And how sayest that thou, she is my sister? And Isaac said unto him, because I said, lest I die for her. And Abimelech said, what is this thou hast done unto us? One of the people might lightly have lion with thy wife, and thou shouldest have brought guiltiness upon us. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, he that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Okay, stop there. I think I might have read too much, but we'll see what we get. So, verse 6 is a short verse. And Isaac dwelt in Gerar. It's 5 words. Short verse. What does it tell us? Obviously, it tells us that Isaac stayed in Gerar. But what did we just read in verse 5? That Abraham was blessed because of what? Obedience. And verse 6 says, Isaac stayed in Gerar. Where was Isaac planning on going? To Egypt. He was planning on going south to Egypt, because what was just above him? What was north? The famine. And God stopped him and said, don't go to Egypt, stay in Gerar. Verse 6, Isaac stayed in Gerar. Isaac was obedient, just like his father Abraham. Now, in the next verse, he obviously does something fairly stupid, which, is crazy, because that's exactly what Abraham did. In the same town, to the same king, for the same reason, when he was fleeing a famine. It's out of control. But verse 6 tells us that Isaac obeyed God. That's important. And we're going to see what that means. Now, in verse 7, does any of this sound familiar? This is what Abraham did with his wife Sarah. Now, Isaac is involved with the same nonsense with his wife Rebekah, saying that she is my sister. And what does this tell us about Abraham and Isaac? And this has nothing really to do with anything. They all had good-looking wives. That's what it says. I don't know why it says it. I don't know what that means, but it's in there. It says their wives were attractive and they feared for their life because they were going to get killed because men were going to come and want to marry their wives and kill them. Like I said, I don't know what that's worth, but it's in there. So that's what we're teaching. Okay, verse 8. Here we see Isaac and Rebekah were flirting to some degree, and there was some sort of affection which tipped off to Abimelech, that the truth is they're, not brother and sister, they're married. In verse 9 and 10, Abimelech rebukes Isaac, telling him what he did was wrong, and because some man could have lied with Rebekah and brought guiltiness upon us. Now, it is interesting that Isaac was, number one, rebuked by a pagan king for the same thing his father did in the same town while leaving Canaan because of a famine. There are parallels there. I don't want to make too big of a deal out of that, and understand Abraham's story and Isaac's story are separate. I'm not saying that, they're the same story and they just changed names or anything like that. Okay, but there are parallels. God pointed it out. Just be sensitive to that when you read the Bible, that there's reasons for it, and you find that out as you go through the Bible. So the pagan king rebukes Isaac. Here's the question. How did Abimelech know that lying with another man's wife was wrong? God didn't give the Mosaic law yet, which is where it forbids adultery. And Abimelech was a pagan. So why did Abimelech think that it was wrong? Okay. Good segue. Turn to Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 16. Hopefully I bookmarked it to make my life easy. I got the book of Romans, but the wrong chapter. Okay, Romans chapter 2, verses 14, 15, and 16. And we're going to read all the verses there for context. Yeah, don't worry about turning there, boys. Just write it down. You can look it up later. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another, in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. That was Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 16. So, what we need to understand, I don't think I didn't really expound on this. What we need to understand is even when there's a level of ignorance, which, let's face it, is a good part of the world. A lot of people haven't read the Bible either on purpose or maybe they haven't had the opportunity yet. And even when there is a level of ignorance for whatever reason, we still see that we are without excuse because God wrote his law on our hearts and we have a conscience. And why would we have a conscience? If we came up out of the muck, single cell, evolved into a fish that crawled onto land and somehow learned to breathe and somehow found something to marry and somehow found something to eat and turned into a mammal and all the way up through to human beings, why would we have a conscience? How does a conscience help the evolutionary story? I'll answer it for you. It doesn't. A conscience only gets in the way of selfishness. But we have a soul. God breathed into man and made him a living soul. We have something that the animals do not have. We have a soul. And we have a conscience written on our hearts, the law of God. And we have to fight against what we know is right when we break God's laws, whether we've heard of God's laws or not. which is why everyone who stands before God is going to be without excuse. They're not going to say, I had no idea. Because they did. They knew things were wrong and they disobeyed the law written on their own hearts. Okay. So, in verse 11, Abimelech, wanting to avoid being cursed, does what our great patriarch Isaac should have done. And he makes the proclamation, this is his wife, nobody, bother her. We don't want the curse of God coming on us. Okay, in verse 12, pick it up in verse 12 of chapter 26. And we're going to read through verse 16. Then Isaac sowed in that land and received in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him. And the man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. For he had possession of flocks and possession of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham, his father, the Philistines, had stopped them and filled them with earth. Okay, so in verses 12 through 14 here, and I'm going to back up just a minute. In chapter 25, verse 5, we read that Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. Now understand, he sent everyone away with a gift, but we're not talking about an inheritance. We're just talking about, your parting gift. Here's your little bag with a pen and, a pack of gum, and thanks for being a contestant. Okay, Isaac got all of the substance. We don't know how much that was. What we do know is that Abraham is continually called great in substance, gold, silver, servants, cattle. We know that his fame traveled across the lands and people knew about Abraham without ever meeting him. They knew his name because of his great substance. So at this point, Isaac plants his first crop, sets up his pens and has his cattle in Gerar. And the Bible says he was multiplied 100-fold. Now, you can read right past that and not grasp exactly what that means. That means for every one sheep he now had 100 more. That means that his substance grew by 10,000% in 1 year. How would a rancher do if every cow he had, now there were 100 for it? He multiplied his sheep by 100 and his cows by 100 and everything he had by 100. Do you understand the amount of wealth Isaac accumulated in that 1 year? It's a number that's unheard of. It's a number that no farmer ever gets. Ever. It is almost physically impossible to reach those numbers. And what was happening just to the north of where Isaac was? There's a famine. So he had no problem selling all those sheep and cows and food and everything. People were literally dying for it. Isaac, in 1 year, because God blessed him, seems to have become the richest man amongst the entire kingdom of the Philistines. And it said that they all envied him, to the point where in the next verse we're going to see that they actually tell him, you need to get lost. Because his substance was greater than that of the entire nation of the Philistines. That's the way I believe the Bible explains it. Okay. So, in verse 13 and 14, this tells us that he became great and then went on to be very great. I don't know what that means, but great wasn't enough. He became very great, to the point where all the people of the country envied him. And in verse 15 and 16, the Philistines had plugged up the wells of Abraham. And Abimelech tells Isaac to leave because he is mightier than all the Philistines. I don't know if they plugged up the wells of Abraham after they saw how Isaac was doing with envy, or if it was something that they did, when Abraham just was not around. It just says that they did it after the death of Abraham. Either way, doesn't matter. Okay. In chapter 26, verses 17 through 25. Verses 17 through 22. We're going to read a few verses here. And Isaac departed thence and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac digged again the wells of water which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. And he called their names after the names by which his father had called them, talking about the wells. And Isaac's servants digged in the valley and found there a well of springing water. And the herdmen of Gerar did strive with Isaac's herdmen, saying, the water is ours. And he called the name of the well Esek, because they strove with him. And they digged it, and quickly I should tell you, Esek means contention. And they digged another well and strove for that also, and he called the name of it Sitnah. Sitnah means hatred. Very similar word to contention. And he removed from thence and digged another well, and for that they strove not. And he called the name of it Rehoboth. And he said, for now the Lord hath made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. Rehoboth means room or open spaces. So now they had a place where they could live, where they weren't being bothered by the Philistines and their herdmen for fighting over the rights of the water. And the Lord appeared unto him, verse 23, and he went up from thence to Beersheba. And the Lord appeared unto him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. Now remember, so God's telling him he's going to bless him further. He's already made him the richest man in the kingdom of the Philistines. But God says, don't worry, I'm your father's God. I'm going to bless you. And, at this point, I'm thinking, what else can we give this guy, Isaac? In verse 25, and he builded an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. So, again, why did God bless Isaac, and why will God bless Isaac in the future?
Well, obedient.
Okay, Isaac was obedient. Let's see what I was looking for. Okay, verse 24. Right at the end of that verse. For Abraham's sake. Now think with me here. One more reason we should take obeying the Lord seriously. God here tells us that he blesses families, including our children and our grandchildren, because of our actions. Something to remember. Okay? Based on the way you boys live your life, that is how God will treat, to some degree, your children and your grandchildren. Chapter 26, let's read verses 26 through 33. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahuzath, one of his friends, and Phicol, the chief captain of his army. And Isaac said unto them, wherefore come ye to me, seeing ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? And they said, we saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. And we said, let there be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee, that thou wilt do us no hurt, as we have not touched thee, and as we have done unto thee nothing but good, and have sent thee away in peace. Thou art now the blessed of the Lord. And he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink, and they rose up betimes in the morning, and sware one to another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. And it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had digged, and said unto him, We have found water. And he called it Sheba, therefore the name of the city Beersheba unto this day. And we're going to see that name come up again. All right, so in verses 28 and 29, the enemies of Isaac saw that he was blessed of God. Now, two things stood out to me in this little portion here, where Abimelech and his chief, what did they call Phicol? The chief captain of his army and his little entourage, they come to Isaac. The two things that stood out to me. Number one, it is remarkable that their observation was that their enemy Isaac was blessed of God, and then they told him that. The Philistines, who are the enemy of Isaac, came and said, We saw that you were blessed of God. That was a remarkable observation, I thought, for Isaac's enemy to not only have, but then to come and tell Isaac. Number two, even though Abimelech and his entourage knew that God was blessing Isaac, because he said it 2 times, they didn't seek after God. They didn't ask Isaac about it. They didn't seek the blessing for themselves. They just didn't want Isaac to attack them. That's all they came up with. Now, I found a lesson in this, and the lesson is simple, and God talks about it in other places. Don't do as the pagans do. And let me paint the picture for you. Every bit of success I've had in my life is because I have found men and women smarter than me, and I sought out how they did things. I didn't just ask them not to attack me. I found out what they did to be successful, and then I tried to copy it. So when you find someone in your life that is blessed by God in a way that you want, sit down and talk to them. Find out what they are doing and what you are doing that's wrong, and change it. Abimelech and Phicol, and there was one other fellow, I don't know what his name was, they saw what happened to Isaac in the span of this year, and they said, this guy is clearly blessed of God. God is, got this guy in his hand. And what do? They don't go to him and say, who is your God? We want to serve your God. We want to know what you're doing right. We want to do the same things in our life. All they say is, please don't attack us. That was the best they could come up with. So the takeaway is, don't do as the pagans do. Okay? Steal some wisdom. Go to a wise person and inquire about their wisdom, and then make it your own. All right. I don't know if that dog's going to hunt, but that's what I learned. All right, verse 33, they named the place Beersheba. This is a place we will encounter many times in the future, and we'll look back on this verse when we do. All right, last 2 verses in the chapter. And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah. All right, so we see that Esau marries 2 women, both of them Hittites. Later on, under the Mosaic law, we find that it was forbidden to marry a Canaanite woman. Prior to this, we saw that Abraham didn't want his son Isaac to marry a woman from Canaan back in Genesis chapter 24, verse 3, which is why he sends his servant to go find a wife for Isaac from his people. So what does that tell us? Well, we see that this is seriously disappointing to Isaac and Rebekah. We don't know if this is done deliberately by Esau to be a slight to them. He could have been acting in a rebellious nature. We're not sure. I think this could show us that Esau is undeserving of the birthright and God's blessing. It seems like he's acting in a manner that is immature and petty at best. So that wraps up chapter 26. And next time we'll get through 27 and 28. Going to open it up for questions. Anyone have any questions?
I have a comment.
Let's hear it, Tom. What do you think?
It says Esau married 2 heathen women.
Yep.
which provides additional evidence of his spiritual dullness.
Yep. Yeah, he was not wise enough to follow in his the advice of his grandfather and father, and instead he marries some pagan women. Now, here's the last part. Who does Esau marry? Esau marries into the families of Ishmael and the sons of Keturah. Now remember, what God wanted was for them to have, there were rules as far as who they should and should not marry. And you have to remember that Ishmael and Hagar and Ishmael, and then the sons of Keturah, were not part of that group that God said, these are the chosen people. These are the people to stay away from. So Esau marries into the families of Ishmael and the sons of Keturah. And after that, all these tribes intermarry. They are nomadic tribes who are largely illiterate and therefore do not keep records of heritage. And there is no way for any of these groups to trace back through their family tree that they are the descendant of Ishmael or any one of the sons of Keturah. Okay, because all of these tribes and all of these people groups intermarry. And remember, they are not commanded to do so. There was no command given to Ishmael. There was no command given to the sons of Keturah as far as this is how you live your life. These are the good people. These are the bad people. This is what you want to do. So who do these families come to be known as? It's the last question.
Nomads?
Nope. They have a name.
Oh.
Arabs. Now, far too many people think the Arabs are made up of the children of Ishmael. We hear that a lot. Or if you start talking to, the Christian population, there is a misunderstanding that all the Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael. They are, but it also includes Esau and all the sons of Keturah. Okay, don't think that the Arabs of today are just descendants from the line of Hagar and Ishmael, and that is it. Connotatively, they could all be called Arabs, okay? But in actuality, they are not. Denotatively, an Arab is someone who comes from the nation of Saudi Arabia. But the term is used broadly to mean everyone in that region. With that being said, that's also very much incorrect. That does not include the Syrians. That does not include Iran. The Iranians are Persians. They are not Arab by descent. And you have to understand, never talk to someone from Iran and call them Arab. They will not be happy with you. Okay, they are Persian. It is a totally different bloodline. It's a different group of people. They play a major part in world history as far as Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, the four major empires that take over the world. And the Persians, their descendants, are the nation of Iran. They speak a different language. They happen to share the same religion, which is Muslim. And but anyway, so that's why, when you use the term Arab to describe, it'd be a general term of everyone in the Middle East, it is not accurate. But either way, this is where the people groups came from, and Esau was part of that. And you can see that does not show that Esau was a good guy following godly wisdom from his father and grandfather. MacArthur.
What does grief mean?
Grief is like heartache. It causes difficulty, and it's a problem that keeps you up at night. Something you're not happy about. Something that you have disappointment in. Let's say Isaac and Rebecca were not looking forward to Thanksgiving dinner, and having Esau and those other two women come over the house and have to deal with them, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
They didn't like them. They didn't want to have to be around them. That was a joke, 'cause Thanksgiving came around several thousand years later, but it's okay, it's late, and I don't expect anyone to laugh out loud at my dry humor. So that's what it did, it caused them grief. So Isaac and Rebekah thought that their son was marrying women who were gonna be bad for him, and they didn't wanna see that, so it caused grief.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, you guys are awesome. With that, we'll pick it up in 2 weeks, and we will go from there. Let's all get a brownie.